ready.
Okay, so how many of you think that human beings actually evolved from an ape? Well, it doesn't really matter because a modern human being sitting in front of his computer doesn't look much different from an ape. And this gives you a hint that something somewhere in the history went terribly wrong. And just look at this guy who has his eyes stuck on his computer screen. He looks pretty busy doing things on his computer in order to avoid things he's actually supposed to do. For example, he may be thinking how to make his computer run faster so that his brain doesn't have to run faster. And this brings us to the agenda of my talk today. Essentially, I will describe some of the adverse effects of the information technology, computers, on our brains, and then some counter arguments and potential answers. And that will be followed by a summary and the takeaway message. Let me first start by emphasizing that computers are indeed a great innovation, but for this talk, I will describe some of its side effects. Right, so I will start by taking an example of a word processor. So more modern word processors, you can re-edit your documents as many times as you want. So you do not do enough thinking beforehand. You can even undo your mistakes. So in that process, because you can do it multiple times, you do not learn from your past mistakes. And then you do not even have to worry about the grammar because there is an automatic spelling checker, sentence analyzer, right? And so your brain is always underutilized and you do not harness your brain capacity. So the conclusion of my first point is actually a question. Why do people think that in a GRE test, you're not supposed to use those fancy advanced features of your word processor? Because those people actually, they do not want to test your computer skills, they want to test your brains. And so, to start my second point, in order to increase your brain capacity, and the way human beings actually acquire intelligence is that whenever you come across a new concept, and you try to relate it with your past experience. And the whole process of thinking actually requires a great deal of focus and concentration. So therefore, this attention is really the holy grail of learning. So your brain needs focus, but what your brain doesn't need is distraction. And in my opinion, in modern age, there is one thing that is really causing distraction, which is the internet. And this is the second point. So with the dawn of the internet, we have developed perfect medium of distraction. You have got YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, mails, and all that. So once you're online, there are countless ways to get distracted. And so in a nationwide survey that was conducted last year, younger people in particular identified that it was the internet or the iPhone. And because of that, they found it really hard to focus on their work. The similar trends were found among students who have now begun to use drugs like Ritalin in order to maintain high level of concentration during late night study session or during writing their essays. And so some of these reports mentioned in these slides, they actually indicate that students in particular, they are losing focus in the modern digital age. And the conclusion of my second point is that in the age of information technology, one of the side effects is that the concentration is really hard to buy. But apart from concentration, there is the third disadvantage, which is really the loss of creative thinking. So essentially, just as in the age of cheap oil, the cars happen to be inefficient. Similarly, in the age of abundance of answers, you are growing intellectually lazy because you can just type in your question in the search engine and you can get your answer very easily, right? So in the process of zipping through the bits of information, we try to find answers instead of thinking about the answers. And therefore, we are acting more like searchers instead of being creators. So although computers do invoke your visual spatial skills, but these gains come hand in hand with the loss of critical thinking, deep reasoning, and imagination. So therefore, the objective of information should really be the higher and useful brain activity. But somehow, when you're when you're using internet, you are not actually maximizing the capacity of your brain. Some of you might be thinking that, okay, computer, internet, they are actually a cause of distraction, but what if next generation of computer scientists can come up and they actually solve this problem? Well, if you recall, Bill Gates actually promised that the spam would be finished by 2006, right? And it didn't happen. And secondly, we're talking about right now, right? So and we're not talking about the future, what will happen in the future. And so the idea is that internet has a fundamental problem, which is that it is actually designed to distract. And then some of you might be wondering that computers are actually transferring the load of doing mammoth calculation from human minds to the machine. Well, actually, I agree to this argument, but the problem really is that we are just relying too much on our technology and computers. And therefore, there may be cases when the technology fails, right? Or it is unavailable. So to give you an example, suppose you are going to the airport late at night and you do not know the way, you do not know the route, and you are totally relying on your navigator. And if somehow your navigator fails, what will happen? And so, in summary, I described 3 adverse effects. Number 1, faster computers may just lead to slower brains. And then we have a distraction caused by internet. And then finally, we saw how the abundance of information can actually cause to loss of deep reasoning and critical thinking. And so I will end my discussion with 3 takeaway messages, which is that we should always try to do basic calculations by hand. Do not use calculators. Restrict your time that you're going to spend on the internet. And finally, we should always try to think about the answers before searching it on the internet. That is the end of my talk, and now I'll be happy to take your questions. I'm really anticipating one question.